All right, to continue with assignment 2, I'm now going to take my sketch, and after I've saved it already as just a JPEG or a PNG onto the desktop so that I can turn it in as my sketch for this assignment, I'm going to crop down around my sketch into what I feel is a reasonable space. I like the crop tool because you can even push it a little bit beyond what you started with. And now I'm going to size it to the right size and the right resolution. So image size to be my finished printing. And I want it to be 350 pixels per inch, and I want it to fit within an 11 by 14 piece of paper. So let's see. So closest for me is going to be this. It has to grow it a little bit, and that's okay. It just softens my sketch. If you're working from a screen grab of something hand-drawn, it's going to get a lot softer. That's okay. This is just to guide our compositing. And it's just like what we did for our landscape. Now I'm putting it onto an 11 by 14 piece of paper as opposed to 13 by 19 inch. It's another standard size. And that's because we looked for references that were 6 megapixels or bigger, not 8 megapixels or bigger. And that just limits the size a little bit. Now I'm going to move guides to each side. Of my image. Because I drew on multiple layers, I'm going to go ahead and flatten it. And now I'm going to extend the canvas size, just like we did for our landscape, to be 30 by 40 inches. And because it's a background layer, it's going to fill it in with white. But that's okay. Because this is where I'm putting my creature. And that gives me plenty of space to bring in my reference. So first, I'm going to go for your kind of biggest references first. I found this good head reference for the walrus. It's at the right angle. It's lit in a way that makes sense. I bring it in. It's plenty big. It comes in as a smart object, and I hold down Shift to keep it from distorting. And I bring it in. Now, if I hit return, that will place it. Excuse me. And now that it's placed, I can use my lasso and just roughly cut out around it with as much overlap as is helpful. And then just hit Command J to duplicate it and turn off the smart layer underneath. And I'll leave that floating out there for now. It's maybe a little bit bigger than I need. So I have a few options I found for the body and the neck. I like this one. And so I'll have to link up the spine on this head with the spine of this body. This shows me where the joints are. It gives me a lot of points of reference. But of course the head's in a different position. So I'm not going to take the head or the tusks, but I'm going to take the rest of this. I don't need the background. So I circle it with my lasso, Command J to duplicate, and then turn off the smart layer behind. And then for the back tail, I had to go for a sea lion as opposed to the walrus. But this has nicely defined flippers. It's already about the right size. I'm going to quit some of these other programs that are open just so it goes a little faster. Photoshop is a very hungry program, so it takes up a lot of memory. All right, so I'm going to steal this back end. Again, I want as much overlap as is useful. And really overshooting it. I give it a border kind of like a sticker has, so that I can cut away from it later. Then hit Command J. And turn off the smart layer. And that's a little too big, so I'm going to go ahead and shrink that. All right, so the way to think of this is as kind of a conveyor belt mass production line. If you're assembling a car at an auto factory, you have teams that put together different parts. And the first part you have to put together is the chassis. And that's the main structure that holds everything else together. So before I get really too concerned with the wheels, with fins, with added extras to the car, I want to make sure the chassis is solid. So these are my three components for the chassis. I need the head and the angle of the head. So I have auto select layer selected here. So I can put the head in place. I can move the body behind that head. And get a sense of how those will connect. And now you see how that spine is kind of fitting my design. And then the tail. Which will round it out. Maybe I'll put the tail on top and erase away from there. Okay, so you first have to start with a solid foundation. Now I can use my eraser at 100% opacity. Pretty soft edged, but not a 0% hardness. Maybe something like 20% hardness. Smaller size. And I want to work it out. So I find where those seams make sense. Now I'm starting off pretty easy because this is all the same kind of animal, like sea lion, walrus, all very similar. Notice I'm not worried about the outside of it yet at all. I'm worried about these internal connections and their anatomy and how they fit. And you notice I'm not doing it on top of my sketch, more I'm just doing it above my sketch so I can refer to my sketch easily. Now where it gets a little bit more difficult is around these whiskers. So I just want to not push too close to those. That's seeming about right. The color doesn't match yet. The lighting's a little different. But that connection feels solid. And these joints are going to be useful to me now. So it's not that I'm going to use these legs necessarily, but that gives me the place where the legs should be. It gives me the plan for adding other elements. All right. And I know I don't need this stuff, but I can clean that up later. Now for the tail, same sort of thing. I'm going to erase away from it just enough with this soft-edged eraser so that the anatomy feels correct, where this big rib cage is turning into this tail. And I can use some of these creases. They can be helpful. The first thing I always tend to do is get rid of the hard edge. And then down there, it's kind of tricky. I maybe want the hard edge at the bottom of it. Okay, now this is kind of a new technique. Now that I've softened that edge, I guess it's not that new, I'm going to take my opacity down to about 60%, 70%. And then I'll just lightly erase at a lower opacity. Maybe even down to like 15% or 20%. And you'll see how that starts to merge the colors together. That's why it's nice to have overlap. But as soon as you lose overlap, you're in trouble. If I do that with the head, now that I've softened that edge, it's going to help bring some of that color and some of that texture through. So it becomes harder to see where one element ends and the other begins, without even having to play with color adjustment yet, or levels. And I accidentally cut through that at some point. Just noticed that. I hate when that happens. Let's see. That's because there's a bit of a lag to my tools at the moment. That's why I closed some other things down. So I go back in my history to where that mistake wasn't there, didn't cut through, and then I start from there. Here I'm erasing from the tail. Come on. And maybe this is a good time to save it. And so now this is no longer my sketch. This is Carl Assignment 2 Fantasy Creature PSD. I'm going to save it to the desktop as that Photoshop document. And I might close Photoshop and restart it since it's kind of lagging behind a little once it finishes saving. Okay, so first job, put the chassis together from your reference. Once that's done, you can kind of refine your transitions. First with a 100% eraser, soft edged, and then with lower opacity erasers.